The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson and a young Heath Ledger, is a fictionalized drama set during the American Revolution. This summer is the 25th anniversary, and over that time, The Patriot has been, well, lampooned with its fair share of grief. Time magazine ranked it number 1 on their list of the 10 most historically misleading films of all time. Ouch! Today's video essay is not going to retread those old arguments. Plenty of articles and videos have deconstructed The Patriot as a work of historical fiction. If that interests you, I would strongly recommend that you watch History Buff's brutal takedown. But as America approaches the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence next summer, I am far more interested in another, less common question. A question that continues to nag at me since I first watched this movie in theaters. Why is The Patriot the only modern Hollywood blockbuster set during the American Revolution? Let that sink in for just a moment. In the 25 years before The Patriot and the 25 years since, a 5-decade span, there is precisely one blockbuster about the conflict that created this country. It's a time of legendary heroes, larger-than-life personalities, epic battles, stunning betrayals, and miraculous turns of fate. And yet, despite all of these dramatic storytelling opportunities, Hollywood has given us one movie in 50 years? How is that even possible? Is it a coincidence? Willful ignorance? Or something more? In this video, I will explore several popular explanations, as well as a few controversial theories that you might find surprising. The most logical place for us to begin our search for answers is the only data point that we have. I will take a deep dive into the production history of The Patriot, exploring how this film got made and why a studio gambled with a $100 million budget to put the American War of Independence on the big screen. Did their gamble pay off financially? Many of you watching this will have seen The Patriot before, but you may not know the story behind the story. Back in the old days, like the really old silent film days of Hollywood, the American Revolution was a slightly more popular topic than it has been recently. The patriotic fervor of World War I spawned a handful of films, including Betsy Ross and The Spirit of '76. A trickle of stories followed in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, most notably John Ford's Drums Along the Mohawk and the musical 1776. I'm not just cherry-picking popular titles here. You've got to dig really deep to find any Hollywood movie set in the Revolutionary War era. And this should immediately dispel the theory that perhaps the American War of Independence simply has not been on big screens recently. The idea that modern sensibilities or current-day politics have sidelined colonial history is apparently, to my surprise, not the case. We are not living through a recent drought. There has simply never been much appetite in Hollywood for the Revolutionary period. So there you go. Let's cross one possible theory off our list. The 80s and 90s saw no films of note, unless you want to count the low-budget Al Pacino flick Revolution, and I certainly don't. It was a box office bomb of the highest order, and it holds the hard-to-achieve Rotten Tomatoes score of 10%. Also, for those keeping score at home, Revolution was not a Hollywood film. It was actually a small UK production. It was not until the year 2000 when Hollywood took its only big-budget swing at the Revolution. The Patriot may have premiered in June of 2000, but its origins date back to a 1996 conversation between screenwriter Robert Rodat and mega-producer Mark Gordon. You probably don't recognize their names, but I can assure you, anyone in Hollywood would have.
And the winner is Saving Private Ryan.
You should speak. I mean, I just want to be able to get Tom and Robert up here. Robert Rodat wrote the screenplay, and he deserves to be up here tonight.
In 1999, Saving Private Ryan cleaned up on the awards circuit, including 11 Oscar nominations and 5 wins. One of those nominations was a much-deserved nod for Best Original Screenplay by Robert Rodat. Mark Gordon was Spielberg's producer on that film, and he owns a long resume of film and television hits. Bob and I had finished the development of Saving Private Ryan. We were trying to determine what we were going to do next. I think it was Bob who said, "Why don't we do something set in the American Revolution?" In a later interview, Robert Rodat recalled, "From the time I was a kid, the American Revolution always fascinated me. I never understood why there wasn't a movie that had captured that." Well, that makes 2 of us, Bob, but I absolutely can understand why Columbia Pictures purchased his screenplay. I've read 2 drafts of the original script, and they are both very strong writing samples. But Columbia was buying more than the words on the page. They were buying the team that just won 5 Academy Awards for Saving Private Ryan. It is hard to argue with that track record. Columbia was also buying something else, or someone else, I should say.
Yeah, I think it's probably about the strongest part of the story, more than the historical accuracy, is just the story of the fictional Benjamin Martin, based on many real people, but just his trials and tribulations and his family and how to protect him in a tumultuous time.
In the late 1990s, Mel Gibson was at the peak of his career, and producer Mark Gordon recruited the megastar for the lead role in The Patriot. In fact, they had Mel Gibson committed before a director had even been approached. At the time, Columbia Pictures studio chairman Amy Pascal explained her decision to greenlight The Patriot this way. "We like the story of a man defending his family because it's powerful and universal." Take note, there is nothing in Pascal's statement about the importance of history or the overlooked period of America's founding. Columbia Pictures was not buying into the American Revolution. They were buying into an Oscar-nominated writer, backed by an Oscar-winning producer, who had locked up the biggest movie star on the planet. And as a pure business calculation, you can't blame them. Never forget, Hollywood has always been a copycat business. You hire the award-winning team from one project, you sprinkle in a little bit of the revenge-fueled narrative from another war epic, and you hope for the kind of cross-pollination that makes your studio a fortune. And in this case, I think Columbia made a very sensible wager. While we're on the topic of wagering money, it's worth noting the sheer scale of the gamble that Columbia Pictures took when filming began on The Patriot in South Carolina. The budget was $110 million. That's north of $200 million if we adjust for inflation today. Of course, nowadays $200 million wouldn't buy Kathleen Kennedy half of a Disney flop, but in 1999, that kind of budget turned heads. The Patriot would be one of the most expensive films ever greenlit in Hollywood, on the same level as Star Wars Episode 1's budget. Just the year before, Saving Private Ryan had been made for only $70 million. We're talking about a major investment and a big financial swing. Eventually, German director Roland Emmerich was brought on to manage the project. At first glance, a German sci-fi director might strike you as a little bit of an odd choice by the studio. And it's not like he was cleaning up Academy Awards either. But I'll tell you what Roland was cleaning up. Cash. Take a look at these numbers. Here's what they tell you. Not only was Emmerich used to handling big-budget productions, all 3 of his most recent films were commercially successful at the box office. Also of note, if you were a bean counter at Columbia, risking $110 million on a historical war epic, Emmerich's big-budget films had a habit of coming in on budget and on time. And The Patriot was no exception. He completed filming with typical German efficiency, shooting principal photography on schedule and budget in just 4 months. Everything for this movie was shot on location in South Carolina, and post-production was completed only a few short months later.
We worked as many as 1,000 people at a time out in the field, 70 horses. Everything was big, huge, enormous.
You always see, like in battles, how people get shot, but nobody really shows how many actually fall and get shot at one time.
It wasn't about a particular stunt. It was about how massive and how brutal war is in general. Most of these battles we would shoot one long take. We would start at the very beginning with everybody marching, the explosions starting, coming through the smoke. They'd be going along till they start running, till they charge, till they make contact, all in one shot.
Strangest of all is doing this big fight scene, and if you get something wrong in the choreography, you go, chuk, 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 oh, sorry, it's head cut instead of... They go, no, it's no problem, we'll just start from the beginning. Can we send those 500 horses over the hill and put that building up and replant those 40 bombs? No, it's fine. Don't worry. It'll just be 3 or 4 hours. You sit in your trailer.
The Patriot premiered in June of 2000 to mixed reviews. The performances were praised, and the soundtrack by John Williams was an instant classic. I love the music. But the plot was considered formulaic, and the historical inaccuracies of the film were loudly decried.
They go, my 5th grade history teacher showed us the movie, showed us it in the summer. And all the time, people come up and I go, and then they go, then what? And I go, and then did he explain that nothing really happened like that? That's all bullshit. And they go, no, what do you mean? It's there's almost nothing historically accurate about the Patriot. It's a fabulous movie. I think Roland's a great storyteller. But there was a guy from the Smithsonian on the set, and and everybody made fun of me all the time because I knew nothing about the American Revolutionary War because it's not taught in British schools. I don't think because it's a particularly embarrassing episode because, the British history is littered with colonies we lost. But anyway, I didn't know anything about it at all. So I'd say to the guy from the Smithsonian, I go, hey, is that how this works? Do they do this? This is how they fought? And he'd go, oh, no. I go, oh, all right. And then there'd be some other day and I go, did they come in with the flags for the sign? No. And I go, is that when they went to people's houses and they recruited me? No. And one day I said to him, what the fuck are you doing here? He goes, I think they just want to say we had a guy from the Smithsonian on the set. And I went, oh, all right, fair enough.
Okay, first of all, I love Jason Issacs. He is a brilliant actor, and I'm going to leave a link to this interview in the video description because it's got some great stuff. He gave this interview 5 years ago for the 20th anniversary of the film. His very funny story is just a revealing example of how the team behind the Patriot was interested in the appearance, the superficial trappings of historical accuracy. But underneath all of the lovely period costumes and obligatory nods to history, the Patriot treats the Revolution about as accurately as Ridley Scott treated Napoleon, which is to say, not at all.
You think you're so great because you have boats!
Is that why the movie underperformed at the box office? No, definitely not. Hollywood has proven time and time again that audiences are more than happy to overlook historical inaccuracies. But clearly, something about The Patriot just didn't excite moviegoers in the summer of 2000. Financially, it was a bit of a disappointment for Columbia. It grossed just over $200 million at the global box office. That is by no means a bomb. But compared to some of the other contemporary films that I've already mentioned so far, it really was not the money-making or award-winning machine that studio executives had expected. While The Patriot struggled to break even at the box office, it did fare much better in the DVD market. Fortunately for Columbia, this happened to be during the height of DVD profitability, a time when many films actually generated more revenue from DVD sales than they did from box office tickets. We do not have any confirmed internal data from The Patriot, but it is not unreasonable to forecast sales in the neighborhood of $150 million. I think it's also safe to say that The Patriot has found a long-lasting legacy on cable television, where it seems to be playing constantly, like all the time. And as someone who still has live cable TV, I confess to having watched some or all of The Patriot, many times. It's a movie whose reputation and popularity have only improved with age. I enjoy the story, and I never understood the criticism of the plot being too conventional or too predictable. It's a solid 3-act structure with character motivations, high stakes, a little bit of romance, and some very memorable action scenes. Don't tell me that you haven't rewatched Mel Gibson ambushing that British column in the woods. I have, you have, and it's freaking awesome. I do love this ambush scene, but in all seriousness, as someone who reads screenplays for fun, I think Robert Rodat's script is excellent. Aspiring writers could really learn something from his sense for pacing. He gives you smaller, intimate action like this, but also big, set-piece battles. Then he always allows you to catch your breath with quieter moments before ramping it back up again. It's the same expert pacing and flow that he wrote into Saving Private Ryan. And before anybody starts popping off in the comments, no, The Patriot is not Saving Private Ryan. It did not win any Academy Awards, and aside from the music or costume design, I don't think it particularly deserved any. But it is solid popcorn entertainment, set in a historical period criminally overlooked by Hollywood. So why is that? Why is Mel Gibson bayoneting Jason Isaacs the only Revolutionary War movie we have? At the start of this video, I dismissed the theory that modern audiences have cast the Revolution aside, because as it turns out, we have plenty of evidence that colonial American history has just never been a popular subject on screen. So this is not some kind of infection of current-day politics. There are two other popular excuses that I have often heard bandied about, despite a total lack of evidence for either. First, that audiences just don't find the period of powdered wigs to be very accessible. Or second, that historical epics more broadly are dead. The notion that colonial American history, a period from about 1650 to 1800, doesn't interest general audiences is very difficult to prove. One of the biggest Broadway hits of all time, Hamilton, celebrates a modern retelling of America's founding fathers. Hamilton's incredible popularity and record-smashing profitability suggest that if a story is well told, audiences are very happy to explore the Revolution. Like, $1 billion happy. Last year, the show became the fastest Broadway production to crack the $1 billion mark. On television and in print, the HBO miniseries John Adams was a critical and popular hit. Okay, perhaps not to the tune of $1 billion, but the biography on which it was based won the Pulitzer Prize and sat #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, with millions of copies sold. So on stage, on television, and in print, the American Revolution has found recent financial and popular success, which makes it very hard to claim that this period of history just doesn't interest the general public. Good stories told by talented storytellers do sell. Historian David McCullough, author of that John Adams bestseller, was asked in a New York Times interview why he thought the Founding Fathers had gotten short shrift in Hollywood. Here's what he said. "A lot of us have trouble at first perceiving these people as real, because of their clothing and the wigs and their mannered way of speaking. They are like characters in a costume pageant. Also, we're handicapped because they don't appear in photographs." I understand the sentiment, and I have great respect for McCullough as a writer, but just because we don't have photographs of a period doesn't make it inaccessible. Hollywood has made lots of lavish, expensive historical productions set before the age of photography. Did you have trouble connecting emotionally with any of these historical personalities? Because I didn't. And that's why, given the evidence, this strikes me as a weak explanation. I am equally unconvinced that the supposed death of historical epics is to blame, because guess what? Historical epics have never died. You don't have to go back to the good old days. You can skip ahead to the present day and see plenty of examples of very recent, big-budget historical period pieces. And for every dud, like a Napoleon or a Gladiator II, you have award winners, like 1917. Best Picture, Best Picture, Best Picture, Best Picture. How far back do you want to go? Hollywood has no aversion to splashing out huge budgets on war movies. They have an acute and specific aversion to Revolutionary War movies. So it seems we need to dig a little deeper. If these 3 theories can't explain the problem, let's consider 3 others. The first makes intuitive sense, but it's also the easiest to discard. We may only have a handful of data points here, but the examples of Revolutionary War media that we do have clearly show that global international audiences are interested. The Patriot was not a flop at the international box office. It made as much money abroad as it did here at home. And we know that the same is true of the aforementioned Hamilton, which has been selling out global stages ever since its first transatlantic tour. And when you really think about it, it does make perfect sense. Good stories sell. They have universal dramatic appeal, even in foreign markets. Now, we're going to get down to 2 more interesting theories that may explain Hollywood's aversion to American independence. These are thornier topics, impossible to quantify, and I suspect slightly controversial. Consider yourself warned. There's a certain mythology about the founding of this country, an accepted story that we tell ourselves about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that all men are created equal, and that there must be no taxation without representation. But, as is so often the case with history, the truth is more complicated. Wading into the real history of the early American experiment is to wade into a murky pool of complex themes and puzzling hypocrisy. Here, we can look to The Patriot for evidence of how even a talented Oscar-nominated screenwriter struggled to square the circle of American independence. The film was widely criticized for ignoring slavery and misrepresenting the black experience in the colonies.
Sir, we're not slaves. We work this land. Freedmen.
Oh, then you're freed men who will have the opportunity and the privilege of fighting in the king's army, aren't you?
In the movie, Benjamin Martin is a wealthy Southern plantation owner, but his field hands are freedmen and happy employees. How convenient. Even Mel Gibson said at the time that he felt his character should have been a slave owner for historical fidelity, and he is absolutely right. But when you watch The Patriot, you can feel how uncomfortable the filmmakers were dealing with this issue, awkwardly sidestepping and avoiding the hard realities of the period in favor of a kinder, more superficial approach. If you want to talk about hard realities and complex themes, here's another problem for Hollywood storytellers. Who exactly are the bad guys of this war? The Patriot's portrayal of British soldiers as sadistic war criminals is not remotely accurate. In fact, the Crown troops largely went out of their way to respect private property and treat civilians decently. Prisoners of war were not executed and churches were not burned. Historians believe only about a third of the population in the colonies actively supported independence. A significant number professed loyalty to England, and over half just tried to avoid getting involved at all. The point is, the American Revolution was much more of a civil war. There were honorable men on both sides and divided loyalties that split households. Benjamin Franklin is one of our most celebrated and mythologized founding fathers. But as a father himself, did you know that his son William was a vocal Tory who organized militias in New York City to fight for the crown? After the war, Franklin's son fled to London. He never returned to his home, and he never fully reconciled with his father. I bring this up as one small example, just to illustrate that support for independence, even among the families of our legendary founders, was not nearly as universal as textbooks here in America lead school children to believe. The easy, simplified narratives that we're taught are far more nuanced when you immerse yourself in the history. It's an immersion that most of us, including Hollywood writers, do not fully appreciate. This is a war without easy villains, a war of divided neighbors and broken families, a war led by men who simultaneously believed all men were created equal, while also enshrining their legal right to own other human beings. I offer none of these points as moralizing judgment. It is just an observation of what makes this chapter of America's history a delicate and difficult setting. It's an observation others have made long before me. A 2012 article in Smithsonian Magazine briefly looked at this exact question, with its author concluding, "Part of the problem is due to our general ignorance of the times. Screenwriters had trouble grappling with the events and themes of the revolution." I have no way to quantify this theory, but if you want to understand why there have been so few movies set during the American War of Independence, you have to admit the historical themes do make it less approachable, both to audiences and to Hollywood types. Speaking of Hollywood types, I've saved the most compelling theory for last. Let's talk about those Hollywood insiders who conceive, greenlight, and produce the movies that you and I get to watch on screen. Veteran film producer David Brown, the producer who made Jaws with Steven Spielberg, once weighed in on this topic directly. And I want to warn you, there's going to be a lot to unpack in his answer, so take a seat for this one. In my 50 years of making motion pictures, when it came to stories about American history, particularly stories about the American Revolution, the prevailing opinion, beginning with studio moguls like Zanuck and Selznick, was that box office would be bad. Jack Warner had a classic rule. "I don't want any pictures," he would say, "where they write with a feather." You have to remember that a lot of these men came from Eastern Europe, and they were Anglophiles. A lot of us had the sense that through these movies, they somehow wanted to endear themselves to the aristocrats who threw them out. Okay, a quick history lesson may be in order. Under Hollywood's Golden Age studio system, 8 vertically integrated studios controlled the entire industry. You had the original Big Four, and then in 1928, the Big Five, plus 3 minor studios. Of these players, all 8 were founded and run by first or second generation immigrants who had fled religious persecution and political upheaval in their home countries. Interestingly, 5 of the 8 had founders from regions of the Russian Empire, which of course was going through some very violent revolutionary convulsions at the turn of the 20th century. This is all important historical context for you to understand why Hollywood's early studio moguls may have chosen not to greenlight movies set during the Revolution. Their families had fled halfway around the world seeking stability, safety, and the rule of law. These are men with understandable anti-revolutionary worldviews. In the same New York Times article where David Brown was just cited, noted film critic David Thompson said this about the moguls who built Hollywood. They were very against the idea of revolution and revolutionary views. They saw it in Europe, and they were afraid of it happening in America. There you have it. I think this attitude could help to explain the low output of colonial American period pieces, maybe up until the 1960s or 70s, when the monopolistic studio system broke apart. But what then? Because long after the original moguls like Jack Warner and Darryl Zanuck retired and moved on, those studios they founded never shook the old bias against the American War of Independence. And if you need more evidence of that, let's look back for a moment at David Brown, the legendary producer of Jaws that we just quoted. He had a long and celebrated career as an industry insider, but even into the 1990s, he could not get a biopic made of George Washington. That was a project Brown attempted to get greenlit at multiple studios for almost 30 years, but it never happened. How many other story ideas from this incredible chapter of American history have been pitched and ignored by studio executives over the decades? We'll never know. Modern Hollywood is, of course, a very different place. The old gatekeepers are gone, with new tech money muscling its way onto the scene. And for these new money players, I suspect the current lack of American Revolutionary War projects has less to do with old politics and much more to do with the bottom line. If the Patriot had been a Best Picture winner or a billion-dollar windfall like Columbia Pictures was banking on, I'm quite confident we would not still be waiting 25 years later for another bite at the apple. The Patriot's rather modest financial success and its massive price tag could not have excited too many executives to take such a big gamble on colonial America anytime soon. But one day, someone will try again, and I am convinced that there are gripping dramas and thrilling stories waiting to be told. Until then, as America prepares for our upcoming 250th birthday, we're left to party with Mel Gibson. Personally, I find Mel's performance as the fictional Benjamin Martin quite entertaining, but if you're looking for other party guests to invite on your list, I do have a few recommendations. Of course, I am waiting with great anticipation for the upcoming Ken Burns PBS series. He has a 6-part documentary coming out in November this year. His American Civil War series remains a personal favorite of mine, so the bar that he set is very high for this new upcoming project. If you're looking instead for live-action drama, I already mentioned the lavish HBO miniseries John Adams. Fantastic stuff. Or how about this old gem? The Crossing is a made-for-television movie starring Jeff Daniels as Washington, and it tightly focuses on his Christmas Day surprise attack across the icy Delaware River. It kind of looks like it came out in the early 90s, but The Crossing aired on A&E in 2000, the same year as The Patriot. Unlike The Patriot, I find The Crossing to be extremely faithful to the historical events. And from the time of my recording today, you can find and watch The Crossing for free on YouTube, so Google it. Also on the cable television front, you might want to hunt down Turn, which ran for 4 seasons on AMC. I'll give it passing marks as a decent show. I did find it a little bit hammy, but it's still worth watching. If you're holding out for my highest marks, the single best film about colonial American history ever made, look no farther than Michael Mann's 1992 adaptation, Last of the Mohicans. It's the French and Indian War, not the Revolution, but I'm afraid it's as close as you're gonna get. Last of the Mohicans is one of the greatest historical epics ever made, and I believe one of the most underrated films of my lifetime. I absolutely love this movie. One day, maybe I'll do a video essay exploring its fascinating production history. Because if The Patriot was superficially interested in historical accuracy, Michael Mann brought the polar opposite attitude to Last of the Mohicans. If you want us to add that to the Little Wars TV schedule one day, give it a shout out in the comments. Or perhaps you have another film or TV show in mind for a Hollywood breakdown. Happy birthday, America.